Well, I'm Jenifer Harmon, and I'm with Smart Takes and Store by Store in St. John, and I am so excited to be hosting Smart Takes today with Don Fox, who is like an incredible leader in this industry. It is such an honor to have you today. I know so much about your Firehouse Subs experience, and you are the former chairman and the former CEO, and I could probably go on at all the titles you've had at Firehouse Subs, because you really were there in the very founding early days. But I also think we should talk a little bit about, some of the things you did around that, before that. You were just telling me a little bit about your past history. I can't wait to see what you're getting ready to do, because I think you're going to do something amazing. One of the things I want our listeners and our audience to know is that you're also a scholar, you're a historian. You are a man of amazing understanding and intelligence, and I think probably wouldn't be something necessarily people would think about with the restaurant leadership that you've had. You are a Renaissance man, in my opinion. And so I'm really tickled to have you here. It's great. And,
thanks. That's very kind. Thanks.
Well, we have worked together over the years, a number of times, but particularly I think one of the times that I'd love to just talk a little bit about was when we started working with Firehouse Subs and kind of creating their whole co-op structure to get them to know how to spend, to find a fair share in spending, and being, a good franchisor, which I think you all were, and you had area representatives. It was very calculated, it was very planned, you walked together. And sometimes I think that's the failing of franchisees when they don't walk together. So talk to me a little bit about, your success with Firehouse Subs and the people that made you successful, and how you were able to build that structure to today. And how many today? Remind me how many units you've got today.
So when I joined in 2003, the brand was 9 years old. There were only 65 restaurants when I walked in the door for the first time to meet the Sorensen brothers, Robin and Chris, who you know well from over the years.
Absolutely.
So it was in a relative startup stage. About half the system was franchised, about half the system was company restaurants. They had only been utilizing conventional marketing for about a year and a half at that point, but they hadn't started those co-ops that you mentioned.
Right.
There was some framework for that within the early franchise agreements, but they hadn't mobilized it yet. So, in fact, there was a period of time where they weren't even collecting advertising money from the franchisees for what became known as the co-op fee.
I actually remember that, and I think that was one of the things that when we were presenting plans, we were selling in the value of actually taking that money so that they could see what they could get for it. I'm thinking back at that time also. The Sorensen brothers were hands-on. They were building some of the stores out for people. I remember that, and had some relatives. As many really good franchises start, it really had people with great passion and belief in what they were selling, and a commitment to deliver on the promise. And I remember that probably those were all primary. The foundation, I would say, of what really makes Firehouse Subs so great, and building those structures for spend, which is often very difficult for franchisees to understand that they need to contribute. Even if it's built into that original circular, it's built into their agreement and their understanding. They have to feel that there is that commitment from their brand and from their agency to get a fair share of that, to make sure it's really going to impact their store.
And a lot depends upon the experience, the skill level of those franchisees in your system. Exactly. So even at that early stage, there may have been, most were single unit operators then. So there were 25, 30 franchisees. By the time we started working with you at EP, then there were... it had grown a bit.
It had.
Just even in that first year and a half that I was there, there were almost probably over another 100 restaurants at that point when we started working together. But still a lot of single unit operators. So you look at that early cadre of franchisees, and there was a lot of diversity there in terms of the amount of experience. I would say the majority of the operators were, again, single unit, but came from, maybe had some restaurant experience, but at modest modest levels of experience.
Right.
They'd had some jobs in the past. They weren't owners of other concepts for the most part. Some were in the business for the first time. So to have a discussion about marketing as like you and I might be able to sit down and have it. It was speaking Greek in some respects.
Yes.
I'd have to be acronym conscious from the outset. I would say
Right.
DMA, and I'd catch myself and wait a minute, let me not kill you with acronyms. Designated market area. Think of it as a television market.
Right.
You couldn't take anything for granted when you were engaging with them. But what was fortunate was we had some franchisees with richer experience, deeper experience in the restaurant industry. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I don't know if you'll remember the name Ralph Fabosi.
Yes.
And he was an ex-McDonald's franchisee, so a lot of experience. And I remember in those early discussions with the franchise community, trying to galvanize support for what we were going to do, someone like Ralph was a key ally. Because then other people within the system, other franchisees would look towards him as somebody with more experience. He carried a lot of weight, and over the years, that's typical of franchise systems. You'll have a variety of franchisees who either bring certain gravitas into their role or develop it.
Yes,
over
exactly.
time.
And some that come in not knowing really anything about the restaurant experience end up being incredible operators and grow very quickly that way. But you also did something very smart in the beginning, and that was you had great area representatives. And I knew a number of them. You had Randy Kibler. Look at Randy, who had headed up the largest Hardee's franchise. So you had people that really knew the business. You put into play knowledgeable people who also had a heart for liking people and supporting them and inspiring them. And I think that's a big part of why Firehouse Subs is as successful as it is today. It had people like you and the Sorensen brothers and those people like Randy Kibler and others, and I could name a very big list of people that really did care about that franchisee, and the franchisee really had to understand, and that's today the same thing. They have to understand the commitment that they're making. I always like to say, when a franchisee is so frustrated, well, I don't want to do that, I don't agree with that, but you're walking, it's not a mom and pop. You have to walk together, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how you would bring people together, because I think building consensus, that's one of the things agencies, really good agencies do, and I think there's so many good agencies other than how to do that, but helping a franchise feel like they are being listened to, but they can still follow the plan, because the plan is got to be consistent.
Well, it starts with really respecting the franchisee's investment. And underpinning that is the reality in franchising that it's a symbiotic relationship.
It is.
You're not going to be successful as a franchisor if the franchisee's not successful.
Right.
But the same is true in reverse.
Right.
If the franchisor is not healthy and viable, that's not good for the franchisee. Two different businesses. The franchisees, in the case of Firehouse, are in the business of selling sandwiches.
Right.
As a franchisor, I'm, in two businesses, the business of selling franchises and selling subs as well. Have to be good at selling subs before you can be good at selling franchises.
Exactly.
But focusing on the business of selling franchises, that's different from what the franchisee does. So you have to gain this mutual respect. Empathy is incredibly important. I was never a business owner or franchisee myself, but I think I can very easily look at it from their perspective just by effective empathy. So deep respect for their investment, an investment that I didn't necessarily make, but I respect the fact that they did, that they had the makeup, the composition, the desire to take that risk element in business, and then work like heck to preserve and enhance it. And when the franchisee sees evidence of you acting that way, not just saying it, it's easy to say, but for various decisions you make over time, and they realize that you're walking the talk, you really do respect their business, their need for profitability. Then when you come to those bridges where maybe you're not looking at it exactly the same way, they will defer to you respectfully.
I think if you built that bridge, that initial bridge between the corporate and the franchisees,
Yep.
I think you will have an incredible brand, incredible success. And I think that is one of the real strengths of Firehouse Subs. And I would say that I give a lot of that credit to you.
Oh, well, thanks.
I remember you from the very beginning being always the cool head in the room, the very articulate, very clear, very empathetic, but also clear in what had to happen in order to be successful. And I think that's something that on the agency side, we feel that same responsibility. If we are managing the spend of money of a franchisee, we want that spend to pay out. We want them to understand what they're buying into, what they're going to get for it. Right. We're going to give them great reporting. And we're also going to be in their stores, and we're going to be looking to understand if something else is going on. And sometimes your agency can actually say, I think you've got some other issues. There are other things going on that maybe the manager isn't even aware of or the owner isn't aware of. I think with Zaxby's, we worked with them for 15 years, and they grew from 100 to,
right,
almost 1,000. Yeah. And they were also, under the same sort of, the commitment of a man like Zach McElroy really cares about people and wanted his franchisees to make money, believed in that, was overwhelmed at every conference. He would get tears in his eye. We look around, I can't believe we've been able to do this, but he counted them as we. It was a collective team. And so I'm always interested because from the agency side, a lot of times people just think we just know, we know advertising, we know communication, we know social media, we know digital, but if you don't really understand the relationship, if you've got a franchise, then you really do have trouble selling in programs. And because even if you don't do co-ops, which, kind of are going away. In fact, you can get down now to the digital level and just spend for a single store and give them a lot of value for a little money. But you still have to really understand their point of view and where they're coming from.
Well, even then in a franchise system, even though now you can get very granular with the tactics now that you're spending the money, the interplay within a market, once you have multiple franchisees in a market, that becomes an increasingly complex area to navigate.
Right.
I mean, back in the old days, it was a matter of one franchisee wants to do a mail drop somewhere, and okay, well, let's make sure it's redeemable at these restaurants and so on,
or it's clearly not redeemable,
or not redeemable, and at the very least, okay, if you're going to do that, well, it's a common courtesy within the business. Well, let franchisee Joe over here know that you're doing it, so it's not a surprise when guests are showing up with the coupon. So now amplify all that. To such a greater degree because of the way you can push digital, and in some cases you can get it a little tighter around a marketplace, but the consumer is transient. It's
much more complicated, and yet it's actually because of all of the technology there, you can actually pinpoint such a great area of operation where your guests live. You can reach back out to them easily, inexpensively, but you do have to explain that to the franchisee so they understand it and they can understand how long it may take to build that kind of response up, and whether you need to make an offer or not make an offer, and a lot of that also goes with the image of the brand and what the brand is willing to do and what's been set up front. And of course, you can't mandate pricing with franchisees, but you can mandate promotions, and I think that's part of it is to get those franchises, it will get the franchisees into the promotion, excited about, feeling good about new news and things that bring new people in. But I would say, Firehouse Subs is one of those that I feel like it's ripe to have another explosion. It's turning the curve, going back up again. I feel like it's, as we see, we've talked a lot here about full service, four walls, dining room, restaurants probably are going to have the hardest struggle over the next year or two. And I think that fast casual and quick service, which I would definitely put Firehouse Subs, and I think they're going to be in a great place. I think they just have to get the message out, and they kind of have to be reminded. And I always say we got to invite them back in, because I think it takes a while sometimes when you have a lot of transition, which I know Firehouse has gone through some in leadership and things like that. You kind of have to find that balance again and realign those franchisees together so that they're all delivering against that promise.
And helping them understand the changes in the marketplace.
Exactly.
Because it's never been static throughout.
Never.
As I mentioned earlier, I've been in this business in some form or fashion 50 years.
Right.
And there are some things that very much remain the same.
Right.
But I would say the nature of the consumer, the marketplace, those business aspects is constantly changing.
Right.
And it's even coming out of the pandemic. Everybody tried to predict what the industry was going to look like after the pandemic. And I can't, myself included, can't say that anybody nailed it in terms of their prognostications for what it was going to be like.
No.
And
I don't think we're even there yet. I think it's still it's a ripple effect that continues.
Well, the thing is, and I don't think there ever is going to be a landing point for it. There is going to be no new normal because it's always been under some state of transition. The big talk with the pandemic was the shift to off-premises consumption of food, but that was a trend that was already in place.
It was.
Within just using Firehouse as an example, we started to see the decline in 2013. One thing that was quite different about Firehouse Subs, still is today, but exponentially greater back then, was that the majority of the business was dine-in.
Right.
About 54%. That was unusual for a sub chain. But then starting in 2013, it started to drop off. Now, the first year was maybe a half a point of, went from 54 to 53 and a half. And that kind of shift could happen in any given year to year. Is not of any significant consequence. But the next year, it dropped a little bit more. And finally, I think it was about 2015 or 16 when it was below 50% for the first time of dine-in. And that was a pivotal moment because I couldn't even speak about the brand in the same context as far as a point of differentiation. The majority of our guests dine in. I would talk to franchise candidates as a good example, talking about the differentiation of Firehouse and as a fast casual brand. And one of those elements is more dine-in business than a traditional QSR might have. Well, all of a sudden that talking point changed. It was still very high at 49.5%, but it wasn't the majority. And so it was at that point that we really pegged this as like a 3.5 year trend, which then continued all the way up until the pandemic. So by the time we got to 2020 and the start of COVID, the dine-in business was down to 37%.
And still, that was probably high for a sub place.
And still high for a sub place.
Yeah.
But I just use that as an example how, let me back up. It wasn't just our brand that was seeing that. That was out in the industry overall. And hence, when you look back to casual dining, what was happening with a lot of concepts, there were other afflictions to casual dining as well. Price, value, affordability, those things were affecting that category greater than QSR. But again, it was all that transition. So coming out of the pandemic, again, in fact, this I did say early on. I didn't think there was going to be like this landing place where all of a sudden things remain static because they never were.
Right.
So there's that old cliche, the old Wayne Gretzky thing about skating out ahead of the puck, but it is so true.
Right.
These days it's a little bit easier to do because you have so much data, so much information to look at to be able to help you forecast out a little bit better. What's happening with the consumer? That's the key.
It is.
Not as much looking at your own trends for your brand and what's happening, but what's happening with the consumer out in the marketplace. You get some evidence by looking at how they're using other brands too. So there's various research tools that are helpful for that. I was always a huge fan of Technomic.
Yes, absolutely. Technomics always got great
Yeah, I
insights.
think they've been the best syndicated research out there. Still to this day, their consumer brand metrics program is terrific. So I looked at that data as much to assess what was happening with other brands, and I did my own because, generally speaking, I don't compete against myself.
Right.
I, just, I really prefer to look at what my rivals are doing in the
Yeah.
marketplace. That's to see what they're doing well, for one thing. You know,
Right.
what
And listen, if it's great, imitation is the best form of flattery. Go follow it and take a page from what they're doing. If they're successful. I think that I was in the casual dining arena at that time with Ruby Tuesday.
I,
And Ruby Tuesday had to pivot. I mean, we pivoted fast. We created virtual brands. We did so much more in the back of the house that we had ever done before. We always had a high standard for the delivery of the food, but we really had to even step up that. Really with all of the sanitary and the packing and just
yeah.
everything,
Yep.
and then the technology that allowed us to take advantage of getting it out of the back of the house faster and through many more platforms than we had ever taken advantage of before. And as you may remember, and it is still surviving, but Ruby Tuesday also had that garden bar that was
Right.
open to the public, which really had to shut down. And we did multiple tests to determine which was to be the best way to serve that, whether it could be made in the back of the house and with all the complications, similar to a sub if you think about it. And that was just one part of a meal. But anyway, we found our footing on that, and we're able to get through that. But I do think that brands like Ruby Tuesday and casual diners are still feeling that shakeout and trying to find their footing. And I don't think that's going to change a lot. I think that it's going to be harder to fill that dining room out. And you really have to deliver on the promise. And then we've had the service issues, which, as you know, for every category, the service issues providing enough really good qualified back of the house people and front of the house people and servers that really understand the product and know how to take a complaint and turn it into a sale. I think it takes a lot. There are a number of brands out there that I think are really successful at it. I would say that I think because of the heart that most of the franchisees have at Firehouse Subs, and often the franchisees are in their stores, I think they fight really hard to make it right. And I think there's some other brands that, are out there really doing a good job of kind of addressing that. But it's still, I would say, I'd love to know your perspective right now in the industry, not just in any one of the categories. What are the big issues that we're dealing with, and how do you see getting around some of those? And some of them have technical answers and solutions, and some don't.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for the industry right now is, especially for some aspects of casual dining, is the business model itself and the payroll costs in particular. General rule of thumb is you've got to keep your payroll cost, your combined payroll costs, and your cost of goods below 60% total. There's just not a concept I'm familiar with in the restaurant industry. They can afford to violate that. Ideally, you want to be down in the low 50s, mid 50s. You get about 56, 57%. You're inching towards an unsustainable situation. So we've had the double whammy during the last few years of the inflationary factors that have come into play. And it's really put pressure. And then for casual dining, you get all of the legislation, the regulatory moves out there to try to take away the tip wage. The consumer doesn't understand tip wage in a lot of cases. So when it goes to these ballot initiatives or the attempt is made to undo it, it's extremely harmful to that segment of the industry.
Absolutely, and I think that even fast casual is really leaning into tipping now and trying to give something a little more to their, to their servers and to their,
yeah.
people
Well,
that are,
it was really COVID was the catalyst
yeah,
on tipping with a lot of concepts, and the guests were very enthusiastic even
Right.
about being able to tip. We had within Firehouse at the time, which we hadn't allowed tipping, but in the early stages of COVID, where there was a lot of empathy for employees that working in the trenches in COVID, when white collar workers had the benefit of working from home
Right.
and all this, and God bless the team members of every restaurant and every concept out there
that stayed the course.
and other industries who didn't had absolutely no choice.
Right.
They had
That's
to
right.
they had to
groceries and all kinds of service providers.
had to be out there. Were two different universes
Yeah.
of people and experience. People you're talking about it. So there was a lot of empathy towards the people that were in service positions and so on, and the tipping became proliferated. Firehouse was a concept too that we ended up embracing it. Our franchisees predominantly were the factor. They wanted to put it in place, so I had to eventually make a decision that okay, we're going to allow it. Our concern was disrupting the value proposition for the guest.
Right. I always feel like it's the choice of the guest, and if the guest doesn't have to tip or can tip a very small amount, I think it was, and I saw some research document, I wish I could remember which one it was, but that most people during that time really did want to tip.
Right.
What I think we're seeing now is that they're continuing to want to tip, but the prices are so high and the percentages therefore are reducing as far as the percentage they're willing to tip.
Yep.
And they're tipping everywhere, and they're not exactly sure, the consumer is not exactly sure why they're feeling like they need to tip everywhere. My husband often says at the dry cleaner, are you going to start tipping at the dry cleaner? I said, I totally would do that. But, I don't think everybody felt like that. And I think the economy we've been waiting for this huge drop and it really hasn't happened, but everything's going up. Everybody's mostly being paid a little bit more, so it hasn't been that bad. Maybe they saved money for a year or two, by going out less and doing less than they would have, didn't go on those vacations maybe that they had planned. So, maybe their savings is a little higher, but I do think I would be interested in your perspective of, what's happening with the economy, what's happening with average check. I have always looked for, years at the top 500 Nation's Restaurant News. I look at it all the time for every category. And, everybody's touting same-store comp sales, but same-store comp sales are just really not they're not even a metric anymore because
for industry-wide, it's on price.
Yeah.
The industry is still tracking down in transactions.
Yeah, I would say it's traffic. It really traffic and occasions and repeat customers. I think those are the ways that the health of the brand can be determined. Because if you're just looking at the pricing going up and to the point of COGS are through the roof. So it's not really money you're making, not at the bottom line. But when they show those dollars, they're showing it as if that is a huge boon, and they did really well. And I get that because, for 16 years, we were very proud that we raised same-store comp sales every single year without taking more than about a 2% price increase. So we always were, driving more traffic and sales at Zaxby's than the year before. But now it's very hard, and I feel so much for operators that, know that the money they're making is not really even enough to run the restaurant successfully. And they've really got to use more technology to be able to get back out there and find more people to come in more often and find their current guests and tap into that loyalty.
You've got to build traffic. I have a well-worn phrase from my time at Firehouse, which is no negative trend is sustainable.
I love that.
If your traffic's down, it's just a matter. You better reverse it. It's just a matter of time. you can't have a situation where you're hoping to eventually sell one sub for $1 million.
Right.
Right? You've got to change it. You've got to be in a growth position. So I've been through various stages with different companies. Firehouse, Burger King, I spent 23 years with prior to Firehouse. It's not uncommon for a brand to have a year or two where you get into a downward cycle, but you fight like heck to come out of it. And you better.
Right.
All right. Again, because it's not sustainable. Traffic in particular. So quite some time ago, I realized, hey, look, if you accept that premise, which is just logic, you better fight like hell never to be in a negative position. And when from the day you are, never get complacent. Never think for a second that it's going to be okay to offset it through price.
Right.
You've got to get back to bringing more people into the restaurant